Hey, good morning, my true crime aficionados. It's Charlie with Crafting in Crime with Charlie. But this morning, it's going to be Commuting in Crime with Charlie. So one of the things that I wanted to touch bases with you guys when it comes to crime is that due to the nature of so many forensic shows that are on television now, the average American, or average person actually, expects there to be a lot of forensic evidence when you go to trial. But the reality of it is that still 90% of the evidence is going to be a result of hard fought, searched out legwork by the detectives. With that being said, there is the reason why sometimes a case will go cold. And a lot of times it can be because legitimately there was no evidence left behind. And that can be very common in a transient community, or it can be very common in a smaller town that might not have the capacity that it would need to do a thorough investigation. The flip side of that is that in bigger cities, crime doesn't stop. So you can have a murder that happens today, and within a couple of days, which is why that show is so popular, 48 Hours, it's because it's true. When I was a homicide detective, there was a sense of urgency because we knew 48 to 72 hours, we needed to collect as much evidence, interview as many witnesses, and get as many statements as we could when it was fresh in people's minds. And also when the evidence was fresh. Because once someone gets killed and there's a piece of evidence, the clock really does start ticking on that evidence and on that testimony. Because something that you witnessed today could be very fresh in your mind for the next few hours or even the next day. But as time goes by, that can start to get fuzzy. Now, witness testimony, which is sometimes people will say, how is it that they weren't able to arrest that person? You know, there was 10 people that saw it, they witnessed it, or they saw that person leave with the victim, or they saw that person drive with the victim, or they were the last person to talk to the victim. That's a very good point. But the thing is, you can literally have 10 people witness a crime, or witness anything for that matter. And when you interview them, even as a police detective, where you're taught on how to question people, you're going to get 10 very different testimonies. And as a police detective, it's up to you to pick through all of those testimonies to be able to say, okay, everybody said he was wearing a red shirt. Okay, so that's going to get circled because that most likely is true. Everybody says it was a female. Okay, so that means most likely it is a female. Let's say everybody says, oh, they were probably about 5'6", 5'8". 2 inches, not that big of a difference. So in that particular instance, I'm like, okay, so this person's somewhere between 5'6" and 5'8", most likely. But then you will have hugely different testimonies where, oh, it was a big person, it was a black person, it was a white person, it was a Hispanic person, it was a woman, it was a guy, because of how quickly people see things and the perception of what we see. Now, there's another phenomenon that happens when an event happens that's called the look back. So you will hear something happen, let's say a car accident, but you're not looking in that particular direction when the accident happened. So you look back and then you see the aftermath of the accident. But you honestly, because you heard it in your mind, I saw it. I know what happened. This is what happened. And a lot of times, without us even realizing it, when we look back to see what happened, our mind will fill in the blanks with what we heard. Okay? So you could say this is exactly what happened, but that might not be the case. Now, there have been cases where what people heard has been used in testimony. In the instance of, there was a couple of cases where the rape victim was able to positively identify the guy's voice, the suspect's voice, and what the suspect said. And she was adamant about it. So adamant so that he was found guilty, because she was able to clearly say and pull him out of a lineup of 8 guys that looked almost identical. They had him step up, and she wasn't even looking at the guy. She literally turned her back to the window where they had them, closed her eyes, and they had the guy repeat what he had said to her, and she picked him out instantly. And yeah, the defense attorney will try to pull it apart, but in this particular case, she was an amazing witness because she was adamant. That's him. This is what he said. And then certain things that she was able to remember, like the scent of his cologne, certain feels. So there was a little bit more to it, but that was very powerful testimony where she's like, yeah, that's him. I recognize him. So that's why a lot of times you can have a lot of witnesses, but that doesn't necessarily mean the police are going to get, a perfect description of the person, what happened, or the aftermath of the incident. Now, a lot of cases, like I was saying, because in big cities, people don't start dying, sadly. A lot of people don't realize detectives not only investigate homicides, we are also required, and I say we because I was a detective back in the day, we're also required to call to investigate what's called an unattended death. Basically, someone dies in their home, no one is there, or they're found dead. We still need to investigate to make sure that there was no foul play. So, for example, someone dies of a drug overdose. That has to be investigated. And obviously, we would look for signs of, let's say if it's drug overdose, drug paraphernalia, prescriptions, even alcohol, any of that nature. Now, that can be tricky sometimes because there are cases where the family find the person deceased, and for whatever reason, they think, oh, I'm going to preserve their reputation, and they will get rid of evidence. They will hide drug paraphernalia. They will throw out prescriptions. They will, just clean up the scene, which unfortunately for us, that's a red flag. So now we're like, okay, this person clearly, from my experience, let's say something like track marks, which are, injection marks in certain areas, are present, and you can tell that they're fresh, but there's no needle and there's no drug paraphernalia. That's going to send a red flag of, was this person murdered, or was the scene tampered with? So that's why we have to investigate it. Now, there are certain cases where we won't. We will respond, and the ME will respond and sign off on it in the case of someone that's terminally ill. A lot of times, if the person has been put into hospice when they pass, that won't be investigated. Yes, the funeral home will come out. They will, be the ones to sign the death certificate, and they will be the ones to do not so much an autopsy, but preparing of the body. Because if the person has cancer, or if they had AIDS, or if they had, whatever illness that has been clearly documented and specified that they had that illness, then they won't happen. Now, there's instances where for religious reasons or personal beliefs, people don't want an autopsy. That can be very challenging because the body speaks to us. There's a lot of evidence within the body that you can consider to be forensic evidence that's going to tell us, yes, that person died because they had liver disease, or they had an enlarged heart, or there's soot in their lungs, or we thought they drowned, but there's no water in their lungs. So in that particular case, it can be very challenging because of the fact that now we're literally going to have to kind of go against the wishes of the family to say, look, this most likely was either a homicide, because there's evidence that it was a homicide, but we don't know what that method was. If the person got choked, yes, I can see that there's marks around their neck, but that's not always going to be evident. We could see petechial hemorrhaging, which means, the blood vessels in the eyes have popped, but we still need evidence to back that up. So we try to accommodate the family as best we can. And if it's not, and in some cases, sadly, we have to go to court and get a court order to say we need to have an autopsy done because we need to find out how this person died, or proof of evidence, proof of a homicide, because that's going to come up in court. And if we don't have that evidence, then the defense is just going to argue that everything is basically circumstantial, and that for all people know, that person died of a heart attack or an asthma attack or a seizure. Valid points if you don't have the proof. And like I was getting back to it, in bigger cities, people keep dying. So you can work a case as hard as you can, but if you're in a homicide unit, you don't have you don't have just unlimited resources of manpower so that you can continue to work that one case. After a while, cases will start piling up. You will continuously be called out, and there are other cases that you have to be, following through. And yes, you do follow up on the older cases, but after a while, you just follow the evidence, and if the evidence doesn't lead in the direction of the cold case, which at this point, it does become a cold case. It can be handed down from detective to detective. Now, with the advancement of DNA and forensics, one of the things that people don't realize is this. Yes, there can be blood at the scene. Yes, there can be semen at the scene. Yes, there can be hair fibers. There can be skin fibers. But if that person's blood or DNA, even their fingerprints, are not anywhere in the system, we're just matching it to someone we don't know. We just know, okay, this comes back to a male or a female, but that's it. So if the person had never been arrested, or the person had never applied for a job that requires their fingerprints, if they were never in the military or the police or anything that requires that, they're not in the system. Therefore, we can't find them. Now, another horrific fact that people don't realize is that there are hundreds of thousands of rape kits that have been collected at rape scenes that are languishing in storage and have not been processed. Of course, the go-to cookie-cutter explanation is lack of funds, lack of resources. But the sad part is that there could be a lot of evidence in those kits that will actually point to a person that has been in the system, that has been fingerprinted, that they are able to be identified if those kits are processed. And that has happened, where a kit has languished for a while, and then 10, 20 years down the road, it gets processed, and we get a hit. And then that person gets arrested. But sadly, the family has to languish, and the victim has to languish for all those years, wondering what happened, will we ever get justice? And it's sad enough when you lose a loved one to murder, to being killed, and then on top of that, if you are a victim of assault, I'm sorry, but those poor people live with the in the back of their mind, like, where is this person? Am I going to run into them? Are they going to come back for me? So it's very hard to get closure. And unfortunately, the way our system is set up, victims of assault are re-victimized on the witness stand, because they get to be questioned, and everything is dragged out about, oh, what dress were you wearing, and who were you with, and what happened. And another thing people don't realize is that male assault victims, less than one out of 10 or 2 out of 10 will come forward and actually report that they were assaulted. Stigma, whatever reason, viewing it differently. The point is, trauma is trauma. So, just to let you guys know, yes, it would be cool if, Mac from NCIS New York would pop out and they would wrap up the cases neatly in an hour, but sadly, that very rarely happens. And when I was on the homicide unit, DNA and forensics was new. As a matter of fact, when I was in the unit, the detectives themselves processed the evidence, the crime scene, and we gathered all the evidence to bring it to the crime lab. Of course, now we have separate units that come out to the crime scene, and they're the ones that process the evidence and process it and bring it to the crime lab, so it gets processed properly. Because realistically, as a detective, yes, I did get a lot of training, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yes, we knew exactly what we were doing, because again, on the witness stand, the defense can be like, well, where did you get your master's degree in forensic science? And I'm looking at them like, I don't have that. And then instantly that puts doubt on the evidence that I collected and brought to the crime lab. Because that's what they do. Remember, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So whatever they do, they can have something so small as, when I was on the witness stand testifying, you can't refer to your notes a lot. Even I personally wouldn't even refer to them at all. It was like memorizing a script that I would go through my notes and try to memorize and remember and refresh my memory to as much of it as possible. Because if you look at your notes too much, they're going to be like, well, you have no recollection of the crime because you constantly have to look at your notes. Like, do you even remember? Were you even there? So again, it puts into question your professionalism, and it does throw shadow of a doubt. Now, the other thing too is, one of the things that we were taught is be very careful of